Now that week 7 is in the books, let's take a look at 5 players that I'm looking to trade for in my fantasy football league. Starting first with Dolphins running back De'Von Achane, because like everybody else on the Dolphins, Achane's numbers have plummeted severely without Tua at the helm. But there are a ton of signs all pointing towards Tua's return as early as this week against the Arizona Cardinals, and if he's back, then this entire offense should improve tremendously for everybody involved, especially De'Von Achane. And we've seen the production already. In the first 2 weeks of the season with Tua healthy, Achane averaged 26 PPR fantasy points per game and was the RB2 overall to start the year. It was working. In week 1, he didn't really do much on the ground with only 24 yards and a touchdown, but he did haul in 7 receptions for 76 yards, leading to a 23-point performance. Then in week 2, he maintained that receiving work with 7 receptions for 69 yards and a touchdown, and also rushed for 96 yards on 22 carries for 29.3 fantasy points. But unfortunately, as we know, the production stopped there with Tua out, as he's averaging just 7 PPR points per game since week 3 as the RB52 overall. But he's still getting good volume with 13 to 18 touches in games that he's played in full, and last week did total 77 yards on 15 carries against a very bad Colts defense. All we need is Tua back and this offense to return not even to elite status, just average competency in the NFL, and Achane could return to RB1 fantasy production. And when you couple this with the schedule that Achane has against really bad run defenses over the next month, there is a real chance that buying Achane now could be the reason that you make the fantasy playoffs or get that first round bye. They get the Arizona Cardinals this week, who have been shredded all year by running backs, then Buffalo, the team that he dropped 29 points on in week 2, then the Rams, Raiders, Patriots, and Packers, all of whom are bottom 16 against running backs, and 5 of the 6 are bottom 10. And then in week 14 is the New York Jets, who are top 12 currently based on season-long numbers, but they haven't been close to the same defense since Robert Saleh was fired, giving up 150 yards to Ray Davis 2 weeks ago and 100 and a touchdown to Najee Harris on Sunday night. And that takes us right into the fantasy playoffs with De'Von Achane. So let's assume that Tua does come back this week, and that means you have just a few days to buy Achane before he returns to RB1 form on Sunday against the Cardinals. Can you use players like Chase Brown or Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, or Jordan Mason to move over to De'Von Achane? It's probable that you'd have to add to them to get over to Achane, or maybe you get something back depending on how biased the other guy is to recent production. The point is to use some of these lower confidence running backs who have performed well recently to buy low on Achane before he really explodes with Tua back and a super soft schedule. All right, now at the wide receiver position, my favorite buy right now is Steelers wide receiver George Pickens. And I know it might sound weird to buy him after his performance on Sunday night. I won't disagree. The best time to buy George Pickens was last week, but the next best time to do it is right now. As a fantasy football analyst and player and a Steelers fan myself, I had been waiting all season for Russell Wilson to finally get a chance to play for Pittsburgh, because I had hoped that he would elevate the offense and passing weapons on this team to a level that Justin Fields just can't do, because he only throws it 25 times a game for around or even less than 150 yards. And boy, did my dreams come true, as Russ immediately came in, threw for 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, averaged 9 yards per attempt, 10.5 adjusted yards per attempt, and he did the one thing that Justin Fields couldn't or wouldn't do. Russ was willing to just throw the ball to George Pickens no matter how open he was or not. 9 targets, 5 receptions, 111 yards and a touchdown with 2 highlight reel catches, both going over 35 yards downfield, plus another DPI penalty called on Sauce Gardner that helped set up Pickens' touchdown 2 plays later. He was the only Steelers receiver with over 4 targets at a 31% clip. Again, it was everything that I wanted to see as both a fantasy football guy and a Steelers fan. Just throw the ball to George Pickens. Now again, it might sound impractical to buy Pickens off a big game, but if this is the new George Pickens we're going to get for the rest of the season, the longer you wait, the more expensive he may become if he is seeing 8+ targets a game, averaging 14, 15, 16 fantasy points a game, moving forward with Russell Wilson. Like I said at the beginning, the best time to buy was a week ago. The second best time is right now. I would love to add something to players like Jamison Williams or Jordan Addison, Wan'Dale Robinson, or Darnell Mooney, for George Pickens. You can probably flip guys like Davante Adams, Deontay Johnson, or maybe DK Metcalf now with his injury straight up for George Pickens. The upside with Pickens is just so immense for the type of player that he is, and his post-bye week schedule from week 10 on is really, really good. So buy into Pickens now before he strings together more big weeks. And finally, we're at the point now where if you're a hardcore contender this year, I'm talking those of you that are undefeated, 6-1, or maybe even 5-2, you are racing towards the playoffs and maybe even a first-round bye. Now is the time then to start looking at upgrading your starting lineups, even at the expense of a little bit of depth. And one of the best ways to do that is at the tight end position, because if you can lock down a stud for the remainder of the year, that gives you a positional advantage over most of your opponents every week, and it allows you to only need to roster one guy and save your bench spots for extra depth at other positions. So with that in mind, I have 3 tight ends that I think are going to absolutely demolish fantasy football over the second half of the season, and it's just going to be more about which one of these guys is the cheapest or most acquirable in your specific league. And the 3 guys that I'm looking at are Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and David Njoku. So let's quickly run through each of these guys and explain why you should be targeting them. The first, as Brock Bowers, is an easy explanation. He's the tight end 2 in points per game on the season and has been magnificent since day one. But since Davante Adams has been out and then consequently traded, Bowers' production has been insane. 10 plus targets in each of the past 3 weeks, 8 plus receptions all 3 weeks, and 70 plus yards all 3 weeks. He's averaging 19.7 PPR fantasy points over those 3 games, and that's while only scoring once. For reference, 19.7 points per game is what Jamar Chase and Chris Godwin are averaging on the year as the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football. If you have Brock Bowers in your tight end slot, that is essentially like having another Justin Jefferson or another Amon-Ra St. Brown on your team. That is how insane Bowers has been, with absolutely zero reason for that production to stop for the remainder of the year. Now, Trey McBride is also a top 5 tight end through 7 weeks and the tight end 4 in points per game, but I can understand if you already have him if you don't really feel like that's been the case. But he scored double-digit PPR points in 4 of his 6 games played, eclipsed 17 points in 2 of them, and even though the Cardinals' offense has really been struggling this year, McBride has been a consistently safe option every week for Kyler Murray to target. He has seen 7 plus targets in 4 games played, including each of the past 3 weeks, and he's broken 50 or more yards in each of the past 3 weeks too. And he hasn't even scored yet this year, which is insane given the volume that he's had, that he hasn't found the end zone. So if positive regression finds him later this year, that's potential for some bigger weeks down the line too. Not to mention that McBride has a super soft schedule after their bye in week 11 with 2 games against Seattle, plus the Panthers and Rams in weeks 16 and 17 for your fantasy playoffs, all of whom are bottom 10 against tight ends this year. And third and finally, we have David Njoku, who is going to be the benefactor of a couple different changes in Cleveland. The first, obviously, being them trading away Amari Cooper, leaving a massive void in targets on the team, and the second being that Deshaun Watson is now out for the year with a torn Achilles, and in comes either Jameis Winston or Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, if we get Jameis Winston for the remainder of the year, this argument is super simple. I expect a repeat of what Njoku did at the end of last season with Joe Flacco, which, if you don't remember, was a 17-game pace of 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns as the tight end 1 overall from week 8 on, and an average of almost 22 points per game from weeks 14 through 17 as far and away the best tight end in fantasy football. That is my expectation for David Njoku with Jameis Winston at quarterback, throwing it 30 plus times to whoever he wants, wherever he wants on the field, especially with Njoku being the most talented and experienced guy on this offense now. Now, if it is Dorian Thompson-Robinson though, the ceiling is definitely not going to be as high, but I still think that we get a Brock Bowers light situation, because it's not like Bowers is doing all of this with excellent quarterback play either. If DTR is in, Njoku should still see a ton of targets as the top option on the team. They just might not be as quality of targets, and the offense might not be as good, so touchdowns might be limited. But from a PPR standpoint, if he is seeing 10 plus targets a game, hauls in 6 to 7 of them for 70 yards, that is 13 to 14 points per game, which is exactly where Brock Bowers is over the course of the entire season. But of course, we're hoping for Jameis Winston to be the starter for the rest of the year, for David Njoku's ceiling to be that much higher. So those are the 3 guys that I would be going after hard for the rest of the season and into the fantasy playoffs. Whoever ends up being the cheapest or most acquirable is the guy that I would go for in your league, but I would order it Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, McBride, David Njoku, if prices are fairly equal between the three. Add whatever you have to your current tight end to make a deal happen, and then reap the rewards over the second half of the year into your fantasy playoffs.